Beverly Hills, June 29, 1988, is past 2 a.m. when the stillness of North Roxbury Drive is torn apart by piercing sirens and the flashing blue of police lights. Behind the manicured hedges and polished gates, chaos brews inside a luxury apartment. Glass shatters, furniture crashes. The sound of a woman's scream cuts through the darkness, a scream filled with fury, heartbreak, and betrayal. When officers burst through the door, they find a world-famous singer standing frozen in disbelief. His wife, furious, inconsolable, is being restrained while a younger woman sobs uncontrollably on the floor. In the confusion, one name echoes across the room and will soon echo across America: Lionel Richie. For millions, he was the voice of tenderness and devotion, the man who sang Hello, Truly, and All Night Long. His songs were love letters that promised forever, but that night, the Prince of Ballads became the face of one of Hollywood's most shocking scandals. His wife, Brenda Harvey, had caught him in the arms of another woman, Diane Alexander. The perfect love story, once seen as a fairy tale of music and devotion, shattered in a storm of jealousy, betrayal, and broken glass. Yet that night wasn't born from a single act of anger. It was years in the making. To understand what truly happened, we must go back to where it all began, to the red clay roads of Alabama and the boy who learned to hide pain behind a smile. To understand Lionel Richie, you have to step back in time to Tuskegee, Alabama, 1949, a place where red clay dust clung to your shoes, where history whispered from every oak tree, and where two worlds collided, one of dignity and pride and another of segregation and fear. Lionel Brockman Richie Jr. was born inside the safe green walls of Tuskegee Institute, one of America's most important historically black universities. Outside those gates, signs still read, "Whites only." The air carried the weight of inequality, backdoor entrances, segregated diners, and the cruel shadows of burning crosses. But inside the institute, there was something stronger: education, excellence, and hope. His father, Lionel Richie Sr., had served as a logistics officer with the famed Tuskegee Airmen, the first all-black fighter squadron in World War II. His mother, Alberta Foster Richie, was a determined teacher who rose to become a principal, articulate, strict, and fiercely protective of her children. Together, they built a home ruled by discipline, faith, and pride. Lionel would later say his childhood felt like living inside a bubble of hope. Within that bubble, he saw something powerful: professors, engineers, and scientists, all black, all walking proudly across the lawns of Tuskegee Institute. It was a vision of what was possible, even in an unjust world. But the moment Lionel stepped beyond those iron gates, the bubble burst. "Boy," he was told, "don't you forget where you are." Outside, the world reminded him that success came with limits and safety could vanish with a single wrong look. That tension between grace and survival shaped who Lionel Richie became. It made him gentle, charming, polite, but behind that easy smile was a boy who learned early how to mask pain with warmth, how to survive through charm, a talent that would one day make him one of the most beloved entertainers on earth. Meanwhile, about 200 miles south, another child was growing up beneath the same Alabama sun. Her name was Brenda Harvey. Born in 1952 in the small town of Bruton, she was raised in a close-knit, church-going family. Her father, a proud Marine veteran, and her mother, an English teacher, filled her childhood with a structure and faith. Bruton was a place where everyone knew your name, and exactly which side of the railroad tracks you belong to. Brenda was ambitious, bright, and outspoken. As the civil rights movement swept across the South, she listened to sermons about equality and watched her parents fight for dignity in the small, everyday ways. She learned early that if you wanted something, you had to fight for it, and fight twice as hard if you were a black woman in the South. By the late 1960s, two young dreamers, Lionel from Tuskegee, Brenda from Bruton, were on a collision course. They didn't know it yet, but fate was guiding both of them to the same place, Tuskegee University, the very institution that had given their parents hope. Among magnolia trees and marching bands, the shy boy from the bubble was about to meet the fearless girl from Bruton. And together, they would begin a love story that would echo through American music for decades. By the late 1960s, Tuskegee University had become more than just a college. It was a living symbol of Black pride and progress. Its red brick buildings carried the legacy of Booker T. Washington, and its campus pulsed with music, ideas, and youthful ambition. The air was alive with gospel choirs, the steady beat of marching bands, and the soulful rhythm of James Brown echoing from dorm windows. Among the students was a quiet young man named Lionel Richie, studying economics on a tennis scholarship and carrying a second-hand saxophone he could barely afford. At that time, music wasn't yet his dream, just a hobby. He imagined a stable life like his parents, teaching, perhaps administration, something respectable, but music had a way of finding him. He started playing saxophone at campus events, then singing for friends. His warm voice and easy charm caught attention. Soon, in 1968, Lionel and a few classmates formed a band, the Commodores, choosing the name at random from a dictionary. At first, they played college dances and fraternity parties, but their sound, a blend of a soul, funk, and R&B, spread fast through the South. By 1971, the Commodores had signed a record deal and were touring as the opening act for the Jackson 5. For the shy boy from Alabama, the dream had begun. He would later laugh, "I wanted to be the Black Beatles." But back then, he still didn't dare tell his parents that he wanted to be a musician. Meanwhile, across campus, Brenda Harvey was walking her own determined path. She studied social work, not for fame, but for purpose. She volunteered, organized events, tutored struggling students. She was respected, admired, and known for her sharp mind and compassionate heart. If Lionel floated through campus quiet and observant, Brenda walked with purpose. Her notebook pressed to her chest, her stride confident, her goals clear. And then, as fate would have it, their worlds collided. Some say they met at a student talent show. Others say a late-night study group. Whatever the truth, everyone agrees on one thing. When Lionel met Brenda, something changed. She didn't fall for the performer. She saw the man beneath the charm, the shy boy with big dreams and hidden doubts. And Lionel found in Brenda something he had never known: stability. She was the anchor that steadied him, the voice that kept his feet on the ground when the music threatened to lift him too high. By 1972, they were inseparable, the dreamer and the realist. When Lionel went on tour, Brenda wrote letters to every city he visited, waiting for him at the Tuskegee gates when he came home. In October 1975, surrounded by family and friends, Lionel Richie and Brenda Harvey promised each other forever. For a while, it truly seemed like forever was possible. But in the world of fame and fortune, forever is often tested. October 1975. Lionel Richie and Brenda Harvey stood hand in hand, husband and wife. To their families, to friends, even to fans who barely knew them, they looked like perfection. The soft-spoken dreamer and the brilliant woman who had believed in him from the very beginning. At first, life was modest. Lionel was still grinding with the Commodores, performing endless shows, riding crowded buses from city to city. But by 1977, everything changed. The Commodores released Easy and Brick House, two songs that couldn't have been more different, yet both unstoppable hits. Suddenly, Lionel Richie was everywhere, on radios, on television, in packed arenas. His smooth voice and unassuming smile made him the new heartthrob of American soul music. And through it all, Brenda was there, loyal, composed, always present. Friends described her as the quiet force behind Lionel's calm. She managed details, handled schedules, and kept his growing fame from swallowing the man she loved. To the world, they were the perfect couple, educated, elegant, gracefully navigating success. But fame, as it always does, began to cast shadows. Between 1978 and 1981, Lionel became Motown's most prized songwriter, crafting hits for other artists as well as his own group. In 1981, he wrote Endless Love, a duet with Diana Ross that became one of the best-selling singles in Motown history. Ironically, a song about eternal devotion marked the moment Lionel's career and his marriage began to change forever. He stepped away from the Commodores to become a solo artist. When his debut solo album dropped in 1982, it was a massive success. Songs like You Are and Truly, both co-written with Brenda, became anthems of love and tenderness. Truly even won him a Grammy for Best Male Vocal Performance in 1983. On stage, he would smile toward Brenda in the crowd and dedicate the song to her. Behind the scenes, however, something deeper was shifting. Brenda remained his confidant, his business partner, even his co-writer, managing publishing rights, contracts, and creative deals. She was his anchor when the world spun too fast. She kept me sane, Lionel would later say. When everything else was noise, she was home. By 1983, Lionel Richie had reached the summit of fame. His second album, Can't Slow Down, sold over 20 million copies worldwide and won Album of the Year at the Grammys. His face was everywhere. His smile on every magazine, his voice at every wedding, his songs uniting stadiums full of strangers. When he performed all night long at the closing ceremony of the 1984 Olympics, the world danced with him. The boy from Tuskegee had become an icon, but icons pay a price. Between tours, interviews, photo shoots, and the endless demand for more, Lionel was rarely home. Brenda, who had once been his muse, became the woman waiting by the phone. To the public, they were still the golden couple, glamorous, untouchable. Behind closed doors, distance had replaced devotion. The man who had built his fame on love songs was starting to lose touch with the very thing he sang about. And the cracks, though quiet, were beginning to spread. By 1984, Lionel Richie was living a life most artists only dream of. World tours, platinum records, and the love of millions. But behind that perfect image, his marriage to Brenda was quietly crumbling. Every year, the distance between them grew wider. Endless touring, months away from home, constant interviews. Brenda, once his partner in every decision, found herself isolated inside a mansion in Beverly Hills, waiting for a man who seemed to belong more to the world than to her. Friends noticed how her radiant smile began to fade, how she was stood beside him at red carpets, yet rarely spoke. Lionel was surrounded by managers, assistants, and an entourage that never slept. The gentle husband she'd known had become a superstar she could hardly reach. He was saving the world through charity projects like We Are the World in 1985, yet losing the world he had built at home. They appeared united on the surface, but insiders whispered that they lived as strangers beneath the same roof. The marriage that had once been rooted in love and partnership was slowly turning into a performance, graceful, polite, and painfully hollow. Then, in 1986, fate introduced temptation. While filming the video for Dancing on the Ceiling, Lionel met Diane Alexander, a young model and dancer. She was beautiful, free-spirited, and untouched by the pressures of fame. Around her, Lionel could breathe again. He could laugh without being Lionel Richie, the legend. He could just be Lionel. Their connection began as friendship, but quickly deepened into something else. Something Lionel would later call a dangerous comfort. Brenda sensed it before anyone else. She had lived too long beside fame not to recognize the signs, the late-night calls, the vague excuses, the distant eyes. Still, she refused to give up. To friends, she confided, "We've come too far to fall apart now." But the gulf between them was now unbridgeable. By 1987, Lionel was quietly living apart, staying in hotels during recording sessions. In interviews, he spoke vaguely about needing space, about finding balance. Brenda, left to endure the whispers of tabloid and the loneliness of an empty home, felt the cruel irony of being married to the world's greatest romantic, yet feeling invisible. And then came the breaking point. June 29th, 1988, Beverly Hills, the night that would change everything. It was just past 2 a.m. when the silence of North Roxbury Drive was shattered by the sounds of breaking glass and terrified screams. Brenda Harvey had arrived at Lionel's Beverly Hills apartment, the one he shared with Diane Alexander. A friend had tipped her off that he wasn't at the studio as he'd claimed. She saw his Mercedes parked outside, and her worst fears were confirmed. She didn't knock. She still had a key. And when she opened that door, she stepped into a scene that would soon dominate national headlines. According to the Beverly Hills Police Department report, officers arrived around 2:30 a.m. to find Brenda furious and inconsolable, Lionel and Diane visibly shaken. In the chaos, Brenda allegedly struck both Lionel and an officer who tried to intervene. She was arrested and booked on multiple charges: trespassing, vandalism, battery, and disturbing the peace. By sunrise, every newsroom in America carried the same headline: Lionel Richie's wife arrested in Beverly Hills disturbance. For a man whose entire career had been built on love, purity, and gentleness, the scandal was devastating. Reporters camped outside his home. Tabloids printed photos of Diane Alexander. Talk shows tore apart the story for ratings. Lionel refused to comment, releasing only a short statement. "This is a private family matter, and we ask for understanding." But behind closed doors, his silence was heavy with regret. In his later memoir, Truly, Lionel wrote, "That night broke something inside me. I thought I could balance everything: my marriage, my new relationship, my career. I was wrong. There's no song for guilt, no melody for betrayal." He admitted Brenda had every right to be angry. "She was there before the tours, before the Grammys. I broke her heart, and that night I finally saw what that meant." The charges were later dropped, but the damage was irreversible. The perfect love story that began under the Alabama sun had ended under the neon glare of Beverly Hills police lights. When the headlines finally faded, what remained were two people standing in the wreckage of everything they had built together. The Beverly Hills scandal of 1988 didn't just end a marriage, it ended an illusion. For Lionel and Brenda Richie, the years that followed were marked not by noise but by silence. Lionel retreated from the spotlight. After dominating the charts through the early 80s, he simply vanished. No tours, no new albums, no interviews. Fans speculated. Exhaustion, depression, maybe retirement. But the truth was simpler and far more human. I was empty, he later confessed. The songs had stopped speaking to him. He had spent a decade writing about love, only to find himself unable to sing a single line that felt true. The man who once filled stadiums with joy now paced through the hollow silence of his own mansion. It was like being famous in a vacuum, he wrote. The phone kept ringing, but I didn't know who I was anymore. Meanwhile, Brenda faced her own quiet reckoning. Though the legal charges were dropped, the emotional scars were deep. She refused interviews, refused to sell her story, refused to become a tabloid footnote. Instead, she turned inward, rebuilding her life piece by piece. In 1993, she founded Brenda Richie Publishing, a small but respected company that managed songwriting rights, including some of Lionel's early work. It was her way of reclaiming power, her dignity, and her independence. She had built Lionel's foundation, and now she was building her own. Those who knew her in those years described her as calm, graceful, and determined, a woman who had survived heartbreak and chosen peace instead of bitterness. She and Lionel remained connected, bound by something stronger than fame or scandal, their shared love for Nicole Richie, the daughter they had raised together. Nicole was still a young girl when her parents' marriage ended, but both made sure she never felt the fracture. In later interviews, Nicole spoke of them with admiration. They showed me that even broken families can still have love. By 1990, Lionel had started writing again, not for hits, but for healing. His 1992 album, Back to Front, marked his quiet return, a symbolic step toward rediscovering himself. And in 1995, he married Diane Alexander, with whom he would have 2 children, Sophia and Miles. Yet even in those new chapters, Lionel often spoke of Brenda with humility. "I lost everything," he said in a 1993 interview. "And that's when I realized what mattered wasn't fame, it was peace." Their divorce was finalized in 1993, quietly, without spectacle, without public cruelty. No courtroom drama, no bitter statements, just closure. The boy from Tuskegee and the girl from Bruton, 2 dreamers who had built a fairy tale, seen it shatter, and somehow found grace within the ruins. Time, as it always does, softened the pain, and with the years came understanding, not just of love, but of forgiveness. In his later memoir, Lionel reflected, "The hardest thing about love is realizing it doesn't always end when the relationship does. We were 2 young people trying to build a life inside a hurricane. We both made mistakes, but we both loved deeply." By the 2000s, when Lionel and Brenda appeared together at family events, graduations, birthdays, even red carpets, the cameras still turned, but this time they captured something far rarer than scandal. They captured forgiveness. "Forgiveness isn't a gift to the other person," Lionel wrote. "It's the moment you will stop carrying the wreckage." He credited Brenda's quiet dignity, her refusal to exploit their past, her grace in the face of humiliation, for teaching him what true maturity meant. "She handled her pain with silence," he wrote, "and because of that, I learned to face myself again." Their legacy wasn't the marriage that ended. It was the resilience that followed. The proof that love, even when it fails, can still leave something beautiful behind. Today, when Lionel performs Truly, his voice carries a different weight. It's no longer the song of a man promising forever. It's the song of a man who understands what forever costs. Every time I sing it, he once said, I think of how lucky I was to have had that kind of love at all. And perhaps that's the true legacy of Lionel and Brenda Richie. Not the fame, not the Grammys, not the headlines, but the echo that lingers long after the music stops, the echo of love, the echo of forgiveness, the echo of truly